Hey y'all. Today Blizzard held another developer live stream where they talk about more changes coming to Season 2, the Season of Blood, for Diablo 4. This includes balance changes for the classes, changes to unique items, changes to stats, more of the nitty gritty kind of balance changes stuff, less high level, kind of more specific things about stats they want to change and balancing the game and all that kind of nerdy stuff that's we all love to talk about in the ARPG space. Um, and rather than focusing on the dev stream itself, I'm just going to focus on the patch notes, which have been released right after the stream ended, which has all of the new stuff in it. And I will be honest, these patch notes are very long, and I'm not going to read all of them to you because, my goodness, it would take a very long time to read all of these line by line, and you probably don't want that unless you like hearing me talk for like an hour and a half straight with no breaks. So, with that said, I'm going to focus just as I scroll through the patch notes, I'm going to just focus on key things. Some of the stuff they showed off, or that are in the patch notes, they have shown off last week already in the previous developer live stream. And so I won't be going over every important thing that is in the patch notes, but I will be focusing on most of the big changes. Of course, I'll be talking about balance changes, stats changes, resistances have been improved, and things like that. So anyway, let's just get into it. Normally I have like a opinion section at the end of a video. I'm actually just gonna, I think, bundle it all together. So I'll talk about uniques, then I'll talk about some other stuff, then I'll talk about stats, then I'll talk about resistances, and then the class changes. I'll kind of segment it all together. So all right, anyway, unique items. We'll just get off to the new additions to season 2. They're adding a pair of unique pants for all classes, the Chassis of Dawning Sky. When you take damage from a non-physical damage type, you gain additional maximum resistance to that damage type for 6 seconds, and this can only apply to one damage type at a time. I will kind of deep dive more into this when we talk about resistances in a little bit, but this might be okay. It depends on the actual stats on the pair of unique boots or pants themselves. We'll see. Maximum resistance could actually be pretty good because the resistances are being changed. So I'm kind of going to put this on hold until I talk more about how they're going to change resistances in a little bit. For Barbarians, we're getting a Tusk Helm of Joritz the Mighty. It's a unique helm. When you gain Berserking while already Berserk, you have a 40 to 60% chance to become more enraged, granting 15% multiplicative damage, 2 Fury per second, and 10% cooldown reduction. This helm seems really good, and that's because Berserking also seems to be very, very powerful in Season 2. I will go over this again later, but Berserking just is going to be a big stat because Berserking now scales multiplicatively for all of your damage as a Barbarian. And now we have both the Berserking multiplier that we'll already have, on top of this, another 15% multiplier damage with the additional 2 Fury per second and 10% cooldown reduction. This helm, assuming the stats aren't complete garbage, I think will be very powerful for Barbarians. I'm actually quite excited to get a hold of this. Especially since my Barbarian builds that I've been running, my upheaval Barbarian builds, have been having a permanent Berserking uptime. So having a very high uptime on this as well will be even stronger. So this helm seems very good, at least for the Barbarian builds that I've been using personally. For druids, we're getting Dolmen Stone, which is a amulet, and casting Boulder while Hurricane is active will cause your boulders to rotate around you. They showed this on the campfire chat stream. I don't know if I can find it. I actually think it's right here. So basically, you can cast Boulder multiple times while you have Hurricane, and you can basically just have a little kind of like whirlwind build for a druid, and you can just spin your boulders around. So that's neat. Not sure how good that'll be, but it's kind of a new build, so we'll see. Could be good. Could be good. I don't know. It could be good. I can see it being good. Rogues, we're getting Scoundrel's Leathers, which is a chess piece. While you have unlimited energy from Inner Sight, your core skills have a 60 to 80% chance to spawn a Caltrops, Poison Trap, or Death Trap at random. Max rolled 80% is pretty high chance. It doesn't say lucky hit. It's just an 80% chance to just spawn one of these. Not bad. Not bad. Is it better than just a well-rolled chess piece? I don't know, but the effect seems to be okay. Necromancers, you're getting Pants, the Blood Moon Breaches. Your minions have a 3 to 7% chance to curse enemies, and enemies affected by at least one of your curses takes 70% multiplicative overpower damage from you. This is a pretty high multiplier, but it also is tied to being overpower damage. But Necromancers do have ways to overpower, kind of like Druids do. And they are buffing overpower, so this actually could be quite strong for Pants, which are normally defensive oriented. So having a chance both to cursed enemies and also having the 70% multiplier on cursed enemies could be pretty good. I'm not a Necromancer player, so I'm kind of like pretty neutral on these. They don't seem like crazy strong. But like I could see them being like useful if you really want to like delve into like blood builds and doing overpower damage and stuff like that. And I think minions overall are actually going to be pretty good this season. That's my prediction, is that minions are actually going to be quite strong in season 2. And sorcerers, we're getting the blue rose. Lucky hit, damaging an enemy has up to a 30% chance of forming an exploding ice spike, dealing cold damage, and triple this chance if the enemy is frozen. So it would be a 90% chance. Again, it is lucky hit, which kind of sucks. Lucky hit is just super inconsistent. This seems fine. Maybe the stats will be super strong, but I doubt it. Don't expect this to be like crazy good. But you can get stats like Lucky Hit while you have a barrier, and sorcerers do have very consistent ways to acquire barrier as a defensive option. So this maybe could be good. Having a pretty high Lucky Hit chance maybe could be good. I don't know. I'm pretty middle of the road on this one. Does not seem to be super strong. Obviously, the cold damage will scale with the item power if that wasn't clear. So, it'll be the actual value of the ice spike damage will be much higher, relative to the item power of the ring when it drops. Aspects, we're getting a general mobility aspect, so aspect of slaughter. So you just get a flat 20% movement speed, but you lose it for a certain amount of time after taking damage. I think for some builds, and maybe like rogues, for example, could actually benefit pretty highly from this, being as rogues have a lot of mobility, they have dodge and things like that. But as a barbarian, this hurts. Just taking any damage, removing this movement speed is just not going to feel very good. I think the inconsistency of this could be pretty rough for a number of builds and certain classes. But again, maybe like rogues could pull off something like this. But maybe, moving in towns, it would be good. 20% movement speed in town, I guess. But that's about it. I'm not going to use this, but I think I could maybe see it in some specific setups. These aspects can be found on amulets, gloves, rings, and weapons. So these are some offensive aspects. So they are adding convention of elements in the form of an aspect to Diablo 4. But this time it's now just additive damage. So you gain a additive damage bonus to a set of damage types every 7 seconds, and it alternates between 2 sets. It's fire, lightning, physical, and cold, poison, shadow. This is similar to other items, especially the D3 convention of elements, which just cycled between damage types for each class. And if you did damage matching that elemental damage type, you would deal bonus damage. It's not multiplicative, so it's not a huge multiplier. It's just additive damage, so it's nothing crazy, but it's there. I think some builds could maybe get a good kick out of this, but it's only additive, so it's nothing too crazy for bonus damage. Barbarians, we're getting the rupture aspect. Your rupture does not remove bleeding damage from enemies, and this can occur once every 30 to 40 seconds. I'd like this in theory, but a 30 to 40 second cooldown is pretty long. Pretty long. I feel like if this was like every 15 to 20 seconds, I could maybe feel better about this, but man, every 40 seconds at worst, oof, that's rough. That's like a few times per dungeon. Like that, not great. not great. Yeah, I'm not sold on this. I'm not huge. I haven't ran a bleed barb in a while, but maybe people will figure out a way to make this pretty good, or they'll buff this to be a much lower cooldown. Druids getting the raw might aspect. After you hit 15 enemies with your werebearer skills, your next werebearer skill will deal a multiplier of damage, 30 to 50%, and stun enemies. And this is actually pretty good because you can do like rampaging werebearer and having, if you're using like I forgot the name of the skill for Druid, but the one where you slam to the ground. That can hit a lot of enemies, multiple enemies at once. So this actually could be up very often, especially in higher density activities in the game. If you're like in doing Nightmare Dungeons or Hell Tides or something like that, hitting 15 enemies is a pretty low amount to gain a very strong multiplier for damage. I think it's only for 2 seconds, which kind of balances it out. But man, those 2 seconds you're gonna feel it. 50% multiplier damage. Ooh, you're gonna feel that. Rogues are getting the Artful Initiative aspect. When you spend 100 energy, you release a cluster of stun grenades that deal damage based. Again, this is based on the item power of the item it's attached to. But your stun grenades will deal physical damage and stun, and your grenades also deal a 50% multiplier or damage. I'm not a huge rogue player. 50% multiplier damage seems okay, but also not sure how useful these like stun grenades are going to be. But I have faith that some rogue players will figure out a way to make these kind of nice, especially since it's like automatic. Every 100 energy, you just throw out grenades. You don't have to like have them on your like hotbar or like as an equipped skill or anything. You can just get stun grenades for any build basically. Necromancers, long shadow aspect. Lucky hit. Your shadow damage over time have a chance to generate essence, and damage from your Shadow Blight key passive will always generate 2 essence. This feels more of like this is not like a super enabling aspect, but I think the resource generation on this is pretty good. It seems pretty good, but again, I'm not a Necromancer player. I'm pretty middle of the road on this one. I have no real expertise on whether or not this could be good, but it seems like it's a good. But also, lucky hit is not great. 10% lucky hit chance. That alone is pretty rough. So maybe the lucky hit effect. I think the fact that it's a lucky hit, I think maybe hurts it a little bit. And sorcerers, you're getting Battlecaster aspect. Lucky hit again, but when your conjuration skills hit, you have a chance to gain plus rank to your conjuration skills for 12 seconds, and it can stack up to 3 times. This effect seems interesting, a temporary plus rank to your skills, but the fact it's a lucky hit, and even at best it's 40%, is not great. Hydra has a pretty awful like lucky hit chance, proc like chance, for example. So getting this thing to actually activate, because it's when your conjuration skills hit. It's not when you deal damage. It's only when your conjuration skills hit. There are things for sorcerers to be kind of like conjuration builds where you like summon like all of your different things, but maybe if you're like full in on that, this could actually be not bad. But man, lucky hit is always like a big deterrent for me. I'm always like super skeptical lucky hit because it's just super inconsistent in my experience. But maybe some savvy sorcerers can make this work. One thing I do want to mention is that there are more unique items in this. If we go to the campfire chat, you can actually see the drop tables for all of the bosses. But if we skip ahead to the Duriel drop rate or drop items, there are some items here that aren't listed, like Godslayer's Crown, Tybalt's Will, X-Fall's Corroded Signet, Soulbrand, Banished Lord's Talisman. There are some items here that just aren't in the patch notes, so we'll find out what those items are, I guess, when the season comes out. They just aren't in the patch notes, which is okay. Sure. I guess they want to keep it a secret for fun. That's fine, I guess. But there's some more uniques in the pipeline, so that's exciting. The next section of the patch notes is going to be most of the stuff that they talked about last week, so I'm not going to go like too far into this, but there's some extra neat things, like there's going to be more cursor options, cursor icon options. Again, items can, or your stash can now be sorted and filtered. You can mark items as favorite now. Item affixes on stats will be more consistent, so comparing stats on gear should be a bit easier and faster to do. There's going to be a streamer mode to hide like player information, an auto run, in-game announcement for world bosses, and Helltide has a visual map effect, so it's a bit easier to see. We're getting 2 more character slots, so you can have 12 characters total. They talked about this last week, but they didn't give a specific example, so there is Some examples here about the enchanting cost being changed. So it used to scale very rapidly. So it used to be 56,000, for example, and then it goes to 280,000 and 338,000. So it scaled super fast for the cost. But now it will be cheaper, or it'll be more expensive for the first enchant, but the subsequent enchants should be much cheaper. So you can see it was 282 on the second enchant, now it's 128. So the overall cost will be going down, even if the initial cost is going up, because it's now going to be based on the item power and item type instead of the sale value of the item. So it should be not as punishing if you're trying to reroll items more than like a 3 to 4 times, basically. Gems are not going to be dropped as gem fragments, and they will be stored in the materials tab. If you craft a gem, it will turn into an item in your inventory, but gems themselves do not drop anymore, so your inventory should be less cluttered with gems now. Level ranges or item power level ranges for gear has been adjusted. The big thing is that item power can go up to 925 now. It used to be 820. And it also scales for the enemy level you're fighting. So, for example, a level 55 enemy can only go up to 700, but once you start getting higher level, they'll go up to 702. And eventually, at level 70, it'll go up to 730. This goes up and up and up until you get to, over level 100, where you can start getting item powers up to 925. So even if you decide to push Nightmare Dungeons past level 100, you will still actually get some kind of tangible benefit because the minimum range will actually get closer. So as you're doing like Nightmare, if you have like Nightmare Dungeon 100 on farm or something, a lot of the loot you'll get will actually be quite good because it'll be pretty close to this 925 range. It's not going to always be 925, but the minimum range will keep going up. As you can see, from level 100 to 101, it goes 1 point up. 102 goes to 832. So you get one more increased base range from everything past level 100. They're changing the way you can get Forgotten Souls. Used to, for season 1, you could get Forgotten Souls quite easily just through salvaging gear. They're gonna reduce that, but not make it impossible to get it. It's still a low chance, but they want players to actually interact with Helltide a bit more to actually get as the main source of Forgotten Souls, kind of like how it was pre-season 1. A really big thing, World Tier 3 and World Tier 4. Anything that's not like Legendary, Unique, Uber Unique, or Sacred in World Tier 3 will just drop as crafting resources, and same for World Tier 4. With all these things plus ancestral rares will now just drop as crafting resources. So your inventory will be cluttered, a bit slower now. You don't have to pick up like a bunch of random garbage on the ground. So everything that's not like potentially good will just drop as a rare resource, because you don't like, people will like copium that like you could get a really good sacred item and then it'll reroll enchant into an ancestral tier at like 725 item power or whatever. That you don't worry about that. Just know that you will only receive gear that might be good for you now, instead of picking up a bunch of garbage and filling up your inventory in like one dungeon run. Nightmare Dungeon teleporting will put you inside the dungeon now, which is good. There's changes to some of the Nightmare Dungeon affixes. Some of the really bad ones don't seem as bad anymore. They are still penalties, but they are no longer like ew gross insta salvage tier now. Glyph experience is going up, especially at the earlier tier, so leveling your glyph should be not as slow anymore. This will coincide with the fact that leveling in general will actually be quite a lot faster, with changes to XP, with bonuses to XP from like Whisper Caches and Helltide Chest experience going up. I don't know if we've seen it yet, but they're increasing the amount of XP you get for like at certain level ranges against monsters. So leveling in general will just be quite a bit faster. Especially with things like Legion events, which will spawn every 25 minutes instead of every 30 minutes, and they also gain an additional 75% increase to XP. So Legion events are actually going to be really good to level now. You really want to try and hit these like every 25 minutes to really get a nice chunk of XP and some loot to go along with that. World bosses are going to be spawning every 3.5 hours instead of every 6, so they'll be more common, and there's also going to be better quality rewards from defeating world bosses, and there will also be some warning timers for when it will soon spawn. Some various other changes. All the mount stuff, basically mounts are going to be hopefully much more smooth to use and won't get stuck on every little tiny pebble on the ground. And also the boost spur action should be much more smooth to use, and they can also break through barricades. So the mount overall should just be much more betterer than previously. Some changes to towns. They're just making NPCs closer to the waypoint, as well as adding an occultist to the Tree Whispers waypoint, which will actually be a pretty poppin' place to be. The Tree Whispers is going to have basically all your important stuff. It has a regular vendor. It has the blacksmith to salvage gear. It'll also now have an occultist, so all of your main vendor things can be done at the Tree Whispers now, which is nice to see. Yeah, so they're changing some stuff with level scaling back to kind of how it was when the game launched. It will scale with your level now instead of being like 5 levels under you. Yeah, so some stuff with XP. This is kind of what I mentioned a couple minutes ago. So the values of XP from normal monsters will be going up quite a bit. So from level 55, you can see it was 370 XP. Now it's 425. So basically just all of the XP values from enemies basically from level 51 and up will just be going up. So just straight up, your raw XP gains from enemies will just be going up. Increase XP from Helltide chests, Grim Favor rewards, individual Whisper completions. So just XP overall is just gone up. So leveling will be much faster now. All right, yeah, just some various other things. Traps will be not as annoying. Monster density for these dungeon events will be going up. The speed of these events will also be improved so that they don't take as long to complete. All right, time for some more nitty-gritty detail stuff. So they are changing a number of uniques in the game to hopefully be more desirable to use. Time will tell how much more desirable these are, but there are some neat things going on. So for Butcher's Cleavers, getting more damage to the crowd control affix. Frostburn freeze duration affix is going up. It also gets attack speed instead of just the flat cold damage. Mother's Embrace, just some bonus life. Now, Fist of Fate has a lucky hit chance to just multiply your damage. I had this pulled up earlier. Kind of forgot to keep it up here. It's here, I think. Yeah, so instead of it having a lucky hit chance to heal, it now is lucky hit chance to gain a percentage increase to damage, which might be good, but also Fist of Fate still has the randomly chance to deal 1 to X% damage, which dealing 1% damage randomly is not good. So I don't think Fist of Fate it's kind of a meme item still, I think. But again, time will tell. We'll see. All right, one of the big topics, resistances. There's a lot of notes here for resistances, but the main thing is that resistances are now additive instead of this weird multiplier for how it all scaled, and it was kind of confusing, and it was honestly at the end of the day pointless, and it was bad. So it functions very similarly now to other games in the genre, like Path of Exile, for example, where it's all just additive damage, so or additive resistances. So if you have 20% poison resist and you gain another additional 20% poison resist, it will now just be 40%. So it's 20% plus 20% resistance, now 40%. It's as easy as that. You just add the numbers up. And so the cap on resistances is going to be 70%. There are ways to increase the cap. For example, all of the resistance elixirs will now increase the player maximum resistance value. You can see that here. For example, these single resistance elixirs, each of the tiers will now both give you that resistance temporarily, as well as the temporary bonus maximum resistance, which is actually quite strong for survivability due to just the way the math works. A 6% max resist is actually not bad, assuming you actually are hitting the new cap of that extra 6%, which you probably are, since, for example, the tier 5 giving you an extra 30%. But yeah, overall, though, generally speaking, resistances are they're capped at 70% now for their effectiveness, unless you boost the cap through some other means. And scaling them is just purely additive now. There will be a flat penalty to your resistances at World Tier 3 and World Tier 4. So this is going to be a negative 25% penalty at World Tier 3 and a negative 50% penalty at World Tier 4. I think I misspoke. World Tier 3 is 25%, and World Tier 4 is 50% penalty. So you will have to kind of solve your resistances now in terms of your gearing. I'm hoping we can kind of get away with not worrying about it too much. We'll see. We might have to use gems and stuff to sort of kind of supplement like all resistant things like that. But I'm still not stoked on gaining resistances as like an actual stat on gear. I think I would much rather have either something for damage or something that boost my flat damage reduction, which is probably still better. Like, damage reduction from close enemies is going to be way more important to me as a barbarian than like an extra 20% cold resistance, for example, right? If I'm fighting a boss that's primarily cold, I'd rather have like an elixir and use the elixir to gain a bunch of resistances and the max resist for that element, rather than trying to always have 70% all resist on all stats, because there's 5 different resistances in the game, so trying to hit all those at once might be kind of difficult. So I'm curious to see how this is all going to play out in execution when we actually get a chance to play and build up our characters in Season 2. But I think this is a overall good change for resistances. I just hope that building for resistances isn't as tedious as I'm thinking it might be. But overall, good changes, though. Resistances are actually viable and usable now instead of it being a meme. So, yeah. Related to that is armor. The big thing about armor is that it used to also reduce your physical damage taken as well as a portion of your elemental damage taken, but now it's completely separated, so armor will only negate physical damage taken and will no longer affect your elemental damage resistance at all. It used to, but now it doesn't anymore. So, like I said, resistances now contribute their full value to non-physical damage reduction, and non-physical damage reduction from armor and resistances are no longer split. Armor no longer contributes to non-physical damage reduction and now only reduces damage against physical damage. So, barbarians, for example, they want to build strength, of course, so they will have a lot of armor, but of course they need to worry about elemental resistances. Whereas, for example, sorcerers and necromancers, they will have intelligence, but they will not have as much strength, so their resistances will be quite a bit higher on just on average, but they will have less armor. So it's kind of like give and take. You either resist armor or resist physical damage more, or resist more elemental damage, at least for those classes. The scaling for intelligence for all resist is going down, though. It used to be 0.05% of all resist per 1 intelligence. Now it's 0.025%, which is pretty low of a cut, going from 0.05 to 0.025. But I think it'll be fine, and actually seems pretty justified. So anyway, yeah, resistances just kind of works like other games now, which is funny. It's just, let's just do what the other games did, because the way it worked was so bad. Okay, the other big ticket item is damage bucket updates. Okay, I'm gonna be really honest. I think I understand how this works, because it's quite unintuitive, but I'm going to attempt to explain how I think this change works. So, if you didn't know, vulnerable damage and critical hit damage were both very critical stats, pun intended, for almost every build in the game with the when the game came out and onward into Season 1. Critical damage and vulnerable damage were by far the 2 most important stats you want to get on all your offensive items for basically every build in the game. And they don't want that to be the case, which is fair, because it kind of shoehorns every single build to build the same stats no matter what, and it was quite boring and very oppressive for the meta. So they are changing it. So, there's been some confusion about how this works, and I also am a little confused, but I'm going to explain how I think it works, and if I'm wrong, then so be it. Someone smarter than me will probably interpret this in the correct way. But the main thing here is that these damage types will now always have a baseline multiplicative bonus, and additional sources of critical hit damage, vulnerable damage, or overpowered damage will be additive with your other damage bonuses. So it says here, critical strikes will always deal 50% increase damage. So it seems like there's always going to be a built-in 50% multiplier when you crit. It's just that any additional bonuses to your critical hit damage will then be additive instead of it being all multiplied together. in other words, if I can explain this properly, I probably will mess this up. But when you hit an enemy, if you crit, it will multiply your base damage. It used to work like if you had like 400% crit, it'll take that base damage times 400% and deal a bunch of damage, right? Now it's going to take that base damage plus 50%, and then all the leftover critical hit damage after the 50% will then be an additive amount of damage versus it all being multiplied together. So essentially what this means is that critical strike and vulnerable have been nerfed quite a lot. I don't remember if they wrote it in this blob here. Oh yeah, so this change represents an overall decrease in damage output, so we are adjusting monster scaling to ensure the best class builds are still as powerful as before. This change is not intended to lower the power of the best builds, but rather allow more builds to reach that same level of power. Yeah, so they kind of talked about this a lot on the dev stream, where they were like, it's not that they kind of have to be careful because they want to keep things within a certain amount of balance, and they're okay with some things being stronger than other things, but critical hit and vulnerable damage were so much more powerful that they had to bring them down a bit. But they're also trying to tune the game so that it doesn't just feel like they've hit us with the giant Nerf bat and then we're just going to feel weaker. So they're trying to change how enemies are scaling and like the time to kill for enemies on certain builds, that it doesn't really feel like a nerf, but it also means you can build things like overpower, like dot damage, things that don't really scale well with like critical hit or vulnerable and things like that. Or if you want to play overpower, which has its own multiplier on damage now, and it also scales a bit more with max health and fortify, which it already did, but it kind of made more. I think this is a buff. I'm not entirely sure. Because I think it already did scale with your base life and as well as your fortify, but they're just emphasizing this, I guess. I don't remember exactly how this scales. I've barely touched or overpower as a damage mechanic. But basically the point is to basically nerf crit and vulnerable while modifying all of the enemies so that it doesn't really feel like a nerf. But it also means that critical hit and vulnerable damage builds should feel a lot closer to like dot builds or overpower builds or minion builds, in terms of their powers. So the discrepancy in power of different types of builds should be a lot closer together now, and the enemies should be more in line with those builds overall, if that makes sense. That was a lot of word salad. I hope that makes sense. I also hope I'm explaining that correctly. I'm not entirely sure. I think there's been some confusion about some of these things, like, for example, the critical hit. It says like critical strike damage affix inherent on swords, for example, has been increased by 100%. But again, my understanding is that the multiplicative amount of damage from a critical strike is only going to go up to 50% multiplicative damage, and everything else after that is just going to be an additive amount of damage, which is just not as strong as multiplicative damage. They're increasing these values to compensate for that, same with like vulnerable damage. So the actual stats of vulnerable and critical strike damage are going up to compensate for the fact that most of the damage from critical hits and vulnerable damage are now not multiplicative anymore. So really most of the, like, for the most part, critical hit damage and vulnerable damage are just additive damage now instead of being entirely multiplicative. It's just that some of it is multiplicative, 20% for vulnerable damage and 50% for critical strike damage, but not all of it is multiplicative. At least, again, that is my understanding. I hope that's correct. And as long as the game has been rebalanced around the fact that critical hit damage and vulnerable damage are no longer these like extremely strong stats, then I think this should be a good thing. I think it's a good thing. We're gonna see how it plays in practice. Excuse me. But yeah, so yeah. Anyway, that was like, God, I felt like it was like 7 or 8 minutes straight of talking about stats. The last little thing I want to, well, not really little, but the last thing I want to go on is to the class changes. I'm going to be straight with y'all. I really don't have a lot of knowledge on the classes that aren't Barbarian. So yeah, if you care about some of these other stats or other classes, and maybe go check out someone who's a bit more knowledgeable about like Sorcerer, Rogue, Necro, and Druid. I did read through them, but again, I don't really know a lot of context for how good some of these changes are, but I can talk about Barbarian, and that's what I'm going to do. So, I referenced this earlier, but Berserking is now a multiplicative damage bonus instead of additive. Remember when I just said that multiplicative bonuses are better than additive bonuses? That means that this is a buff. So, berserking seems to be possibly borderline mandatory. Um, it actually means that the Relentless Fury, I don't remember, that doesn't sound right. Whatever, the key passive for Barbarian that improves the berserking damage bonus actually could be a very strong key passive now that it's actually multiplicative damage. So we will see how good this is. But I think it's going to be very good. And my Barbarian build that I've showcased on the channel is basically permanently in berserking as well, which is also why I was super into the unique helmet from earlier that I showcased at the very beginning. Where is it? The Tusk Helm. Again, when you gain berserking, already berserk, you gain an additional 15% multiplicative damage, plus the Fury regen and the cooldown reduction. So this helm seems to be pretty effing good to me. I'm actually excited to hopefully get that thing to drop. All right, back onto the class changes for Barbarian. A number of skills across all of the classes. They're changing Fortify across the board to scale off max life instead of base life, which is just a straight buff. So you'll be generating more Fortify from basically every source now because it's actually based on your max life instead of your base life. So that is a positive change. Godspeed. Upheaval. We got buffed. I believed in the skill. It kind of got memed on for a while, but it's getting buffed. Our time has come, friends. This damage increase is not, I don't think this is huge, but it's something. 0.7 to 0.07 or 0.77 increase for the kind of damage scaling amount on the skill itself. So this is good to see. The Furious Upheaval bonus damage per stack has gone up quite a lot. It used to be 5% for 10 stacks, which was like 50%, and now it's 12% for every 6 stacks, which should be, what, 72, I believe. So going from 50% to 72% damage is pretty effing good. And again, you know, a lot of skills relating to Fortify have not been changed to max life scaling. Wrath of the Berserker, they talked about this on the dev stream. This is one of a couple changes for, I think, Druids, like Rampaging Werebeast. Critical damage scaling is also going to be getting a similar change. So the maximum damage bonus from Supreme Wrath of Berserker is not going to be 100% bonus damage. This used to have no cap on the amount of bonus damage it could scale up to, so now there's a cap to the amount of damage. So there's no more infinite scaling for this or the Rampaging Werebeast's critical hit damage for Druids. Enhanced Rupture, this damage is increased by 10% for every 50 strength you have. Sure. Warrior Rupture, slightly more attack speed, and Fighter's Rupture has a bit more healing. Sure. Just some slight buffs. Fury gain on this, max life increase, sure. Damage reduction from elites, sure. And again, Fortify based on max life now. So yeah, I mean, we'll take it. Not too bad. Paragon actually has some interesting changes for all the classes, but also for Barbarian, in my opinion. So the Decimator Paragon node, the legendary node itself, it used to be a total meme. It was lucky hit chance. I didn't even say lucky hit, but it was a lucky hit chance. Up to 8% chance to make enemies vulnerable for 2 seconds. This was abysmal and very bad. But now it will say each time you make an enemy vulnerable, your damage is increased by 10% for 5 seconds. I'm not sure if this is multiplicative or not. I'm not too sure. It doesn't specify here in the text, but it also says overpowering a vulnerable enemy grants an additional 10% bonus for 5 seconds. This is much more desirable than the original bonus effect, so I like to see this. I do like to see this. Because I was using this Paragon board, but I wasn't using the actual legendary node itself. The Bonebreaker node, it used to be where your overpowers with your two-handed bludgeoning weapon would stun and grant you max life as Fortify. And now all it does is just every 12 seconds your next skill is guaranteed to overpower, which is not bad. 12 seconds is not too long of a cooldown wait for overpower. You could even pair this with the Decimator node if you really wanted to make this work. With overpower into vulnerable enemies. You'd have to play around this 12-second timer, I think, but you could definitely make it work if you wanted to do that. Flawless Technique is now going to be up to 4-second duration and has a more critical hit chance amount attached to it. The attack speed bonus from Carnage node is going to be doubled, which is huge in my opinion. The Warbringer node has even more max life from Fortify. Weapons Master used to just give you 3 Fury when you swap weapons, but now it gives you 4% of your maximum Fury, which is significantly better than just a 3 flat Fury gain. Hemorrhage is one of a few changes to Paragon nodes, which they are trying to create new build opportunities for the various classes. So it used to just be a multiplicative scaling for enemies affected by your bleed. They take more damage from you. But now your bleeding damage is increased by 50% of the total amount of your damage to vulnerable enemies bonus. So, funnily enough, despite vulnerable damage being changed to being mostly additive outside of that initial 20% multiplicative, this exists. So, your bleeding damage is increased multiplicatively by the damage to vulnerable enemies stat. So basically, a 50% of your damage to vulnerable enemies stat bonus is now going to apply to your bleed damage multiplicatively. That was a word salad of a sentence. But there are some other Paragon nodes like this for the other classes, which will add a stat that will improve your damage multiplicatively when you apply the Paragon node. So there's like some different ways to build around damage. I believe rogues have a I think it's rogue. Am I right? I think it's rogue, where they have a yeah, here it is. So rogues note witness legendary node, for example, your ultimate skills gain an additional 10% multiplicative bonus damage from your damage with ultimate stat to all skills for 8 seconds when cast. So when you use your ultimate, 8 seconds afterwards, you will gain a multiplicative damage bonus, which scales with the actual stat damage with ultimate skills. So they're giving you new stats to build towards if you pick these legendary nodes. They give you more ways for multiplicative damage, like multipliers, which is interesting. That they're kind of trying to move away from everything being crit and vulnerable based, but they're adding other ways to spec into more, multiplicative stats. So I find that kind of interesting as a way to kind of get around just being completely based on critical hit and vulnerable damage like we had in Season 1. And Blood Rage is going to be getting an additional functionality. Your damage dealt is increased by 25% of the total damage while Berserking bonus. Remember when I said that Berserking was going to be good? This is also why Berserking is going to be good, because you will now be able to get another damage increase for the amount of your damage while Berserking stat. Yeah, Berserking is going to be the go-to stat for Barbarians in Season 2. I think I would not be surprised if this gets nerfed in the future, because Berserking is going to be extremely oppressive for Barbarians. I think if you are not Berserking as a Barbarian build, you should fix that. That's my foresight into what I think will happen with the patch. We'll see how it goes. They're changing the Ancestral Force, Hammer of the Ancients power. So the value is much lower, but it now is a direct increase to the Hammer of the Ancients skill, rather than it being a separate instance of damage like it used to be. Earth Striker's aspect, weapon swap requirement has reduced from 10 weapon swaps to 8, which is not bad. And the overpower proc now happens on your next non-basic attack, so you don't have to worry about it being consumed by your lunging strike or your bash or frenzy or whatever. Unique items have been changed for Barbarians. The Ramalani's sword. Damage to vulnerable has been changed with maximum fury at 150% of normal value, so you just get more max fury. And the damage per fury has been increased from 0.1, 0.3 to 0.2 to 0.4. Azure Wrath, the non-physical damage affix has gone up by quite a lot, but also this sword kind of sucks, so whatever. Here's the fun one. Hellhammer, the critical strike damage affix has been replaced with bonus ranks to upheaval. The damage to burning enemies is whatever, but bonus ranks to upheaval is actually quite enticing, at least for me. Is it gonna be better than a legendary two-handed weapon? I don't know, but having plus ranks to upheaval is significantly better. Well, at least now with the critical hit damage being not as powerful as it once was, plus ranks to upheaval is quite strong, and I'm actually excited to use this. I'm gonna skip ahead to Overkill, which has a similar change where it now gains ranks to death blow instead of the bonus critical strike chance. So I think Overkill and Hellhammer might actually be viable. I sure hope so, because I've been wanting these things to actually be viable for a long time now. And I think they might be. I think this is enough to make them viable, because this will stack with our gloves, which can also roll ranks to upheaval. And they showed a screenshot, if I can find it. It's like just ahead. Here we go. This has +4 ranks to upheaval on this ancestral variant. So having +4 to upheaval here and another +4 to upheaval on your gloves means that you have +8 to upheaval, which would be super strong. And same for like Deathblow. You can get Deathblow to like +8 as well from gear, which is quite strong. So I'm actually looking forward to getting these things to drop. Hopefully they are pretty good. I think this is going to make them much better than they were. The other one that I'm actually really excited for as well is Ancient's Oath. So the main thing is the unique effect has been changed. So it used to slow enemies that were hit by your Steel Grasp. But now it says enemies that have been pulled take a multiplier amount of bonus damage from you for 3 seconds, which is significantly better than just slowing enemies. I do hope this is a typo, though, because it says enemies that have been pulled take bonus damage. But if we skip ahead in the actual dev slideshow here, it actually... Oh, my camera's covering it up, whatever. Anyway, it says... You know what, we'll do this on the fly editing. Here we go. Okay. So, yeah, it says Steel Grasp launches 2 additional chains. Enemies hit by Steel Grasp take 44% damage. So I really hope it's actually enemies hit, not enemies pulled, because this means that if you can't pull bosses, for example, so this means that this would not work on bosses, which would kind of suck. So I really do hope it is actually enemies hit and not enemies pulled. This would make this a very, very strong unique item that I would actually be excited to have drop, which is nice. There's actually 3 unique items I actually am excited to try and get now, which is much more than previously, so I will take that as a win. A few other things here. Fields of Crimson now gains Rupture cooldown reduction as a replacement stat to Ranks of Rupture. Battle Trance bonus ranks of Frenzy has been increased, and bonus Maximum Fury is a replacement stat. 100,000 steps, the big thing is that the cooldown for the free ground stomp has been cut in half, which is pretty good, but also I don't really think I'm going to be using these boots anyway, personally, but there's probably some builds that can very much benefit from a 15-second cooldown for a free ground stomp instead of 30. Rage of Harrogath gets a slight increase for the damage reduction from bleeding enemies, and Gore's Grips no longer have attack speed and will now gain the critical strike chance against close enemies instead of attack speed. Alright, and again, I'm not going to go over too many of the other class changes. This video is already so long. If you've even listened this far, you're such a trooper, but I would maybe go read these yourselves, or maybe listen to someone else who has more expertise in these classes, because I'm not even going to touch these right now. But they seem good. They seem like good changes from what I've seen, I think. But I'm also not really knowledgeable enough to really know about that, at least compared to my knowledge for Barbarian. And then there's a whole lot of bug fixes. I'm not going to read any of this, but cool, these things are fixed. That's reassuring. Yeah, alright. Patch notes done. Holy moly, it's been like 45 minutes. That's actually longer than 45 minutes. Yeah. Overall, I'm actually excited. I'm actually way more excited about Season 2 than I was for Season 1. Especially since Season 1 had that really disastrous, launch patch for Season 1 that just nerfed a bunch of things, and the whole internet was so pissed off, and everyone was so super mad. There's actually some really fun things to look forward to. I'm actually excited for unique items for once. Whoop-de-doo, what a novel concept to be excited for unique items. My build specifically got buffed, so yeah, I feel pretty good about that. I will be continuing my dominance, not really dominance, but my attempt at dominance at my Upheaval Barbarian build. I'm actually gonna consider, how do I say this? I think I'm actually gonna consider maybe doing like a theory crafting video where I talk about why I make the decisions I do when I make my builds. I've done this on stream sometimes, and people seem to like that. So I'll see if I can, if the websites get updated fast enough for some of the changes. I think I might theory craft some of these things on like the D4 Builds website or whatever. Or maybe I'll just do some professional MS Paint documents and write it on things and just talk out loud. I don't know. Anyway, this video was super long, but thank you for watching if you have watched this far. I will be streaming a fair amount of Diablo 4 next week. Probably won't be playing on server launch. I don't think I can make that happen, but I will be playing that night as well as in the following week and probably weeks after, I think. I'm actually much more excited about Season 2 than Season 1. I was very, very middling on Season 1, but Season 2 has got some fun stuff to look forward to. So anyway, I'm gonna sign off. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in season 2. I hope you have a great season 2 launch next week, October 17th. See you there.